joining us today here for a Family Divided panel. Today's panel discussion is going to touch on topics that we hear about in our various communities, but we don't always discuss them. Our goal today is to walk away with solutions and implement them into our communities in order to build stronger and healthier communities back home. So we want this panel to be interactive. So, who in our audience today is a convert? A good number. Who here is in an intercultural or interracial marriage? And who here hails from an immigrant family? I would like to take a moment to introduce our panelists. To my right, I have Jihad Turk. He is the president of Bayan Claremont, the Islamic graduate school of Claremont Lincoln University. Is designed to educate Muslim scholars and religious leaders. There's Namira Islam. She's the co-founder and the executive director of Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. She's also a lawyer and a graphic designer. And we have Imam Marc Manley, who was born in Detroit and embraced Islam in 1992. He is an imam and a religious scholar, a religious educator as well in Southern California. And various roles he's had is chaplain at Drexel University and at UPenn. Without further ado, Jihad Turk.
Sure.
S.a.w. So I'm going to ask you all to start by doing me a favor. I'm going to ask those people in the back half of the room to come on up to give me a little bit more. Show me some love. Come on up forward. So if you're in the back half of the room, go ahead and stand up. Those who are in the front, just stay where you are. And then come on up and fill in. There's some chairs over here. We'll create a more intimate, cozy environment. I still see you sitting back there. Come on, stand up. If you have children, that's the one exception. All right. All right, I see some people nodding in the back. All right. So I'll talk a little bit about myself, and then a little bit about some experience in the community, and then try and address solutions all within 6 minutes. I'm going to set my timer here. All right. So, my mother is a Caucasian American Christian from Oklahoma. My father is an immigrant from Palestine. He was born in Jerusalem. He immigrated to the United States in 1956, 17 years old, finished high school here, met my mom, got married. I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. So I come from a biracial family, and when I was 23, I proposed to my now wife of 20 years, Namira, who's Kashmiri. She was born in Srinagar, but raised in the Midwest, Ohio, Michigan area. And so our kids are Palestinian American, Kashmiri. They're very confused. I served for 7 years as the imam of the largest and oldest mosque in Southern California, the Islamic Center of Southern California, which is a very diverse community. We have over 80 different nationalities that would come and pray at our mosque regularly. And I would officiate marriages and oftentimes help negotiate marriages between different ethnic and racial individuals of different ethnic and racial backgrounds. So, inshallah, in my few minutes that I have with you, I wanted to address the issue of inter-ethnic marriage and some of the challenges that are faced in the lead up to the marriage and then post-marriage. And some of these are universal. They'll apply to any couple interested in getting married. But I'll start with the idea of navigating different traditions and cultures. What I've found is the majority of individuals getting married from different ethnic backgrounds, you have one of two scenarios. Either one, they're both born and raised here, and so they're American culturally speaking, but of different ethnic traditions and heritage background, etc. The other is you have one who's an immigrant and the other one who's American. They have two different cultures. And so there are two different scenarios that have two different sets of challenges. I still have a little bit more time there, young man, so don't... All right. So, with regards to those who were born and raised here, I'll start with that scenario. The challenges usually are not between the soon-to-be husband and wife, because culturally speaking, they have a lot more in common. They're both American culturally speaking, and so they speak the same language, and they can navigate the nuances of the relationship and expectations more easily. The challenges oftentimes for those couples are dealing with their families. Families oftentimes play a role that is supportive and loving, and they facilitate relationship. But sometimes, and some of you might have come from these families or know of these families or be these families, sometimes families can play a role that is less than helpful in facilitating a healthy relationship. I see some people nodding and other people kind of avoiding indicating their position on this. But what I found is that here's the bottom line. Families love, or parents love for their children the best. They want their children to soar and exceed even them in every way possible. However, parents are human beings. They have fears and apprehensions and concerns, and when their son or daughter is considering marrying someone from a different cultural background, they have a concern that is very human. Number one is they don't know if it's going to work out because they can't really assess the other person because they don't fit into their assessment matrix. They don't necessarily know their parents, they don't know their family, they don't know the village, so they can't really determine whether that person, in terms of how you would generally assess someone for marriage in their cultural tradition, they can't fit them into that matrix, and so they don't know what to make of them. So they're sort of a wild card. So there's apprehension generally there. That's number one. Number two, they have a personal apprehension, a personal concern, because as parents, they've invested their whole lives in raising their son or their daughter, and now they're going to be marrying into something other than what they're familiar with, and so they have a concern. Well, what's our role going to be? What are we going to be included? Are we going to be invited? Are we going to be relevant? Are they going to want to speak our language? Are they going to want to eat our food? Are they going to appreciate us? Are we going to have any role to play in our son or daughter's life and in our grandchildren's life? So it's a legitimate... All right, time to... All right. How do I turn this off now? All right, stop. All right, so that finishes my time. Thank you very much. Now, I'll finish my thought here. I put it for 5 minutes, so I give myself a minute leeway. She's like, that wasn't 6 minutes. All right, so there's a very legitimate concern. And oftentimes this plays out, and I'm just going to be frank, this plays out through a counterproductive process of emotional manipulation. So what they'll do is if they're not approving of the marriage, in some cases, and I've seen it, they'll just say, well, you know, what are people back home going to say? We don't appreciate you marrying someone from that background or that tradition, and it might be for issues of race or color or other things that are very anti-Islamic, but they'll just come right out and say it. And just say, well, what are people going to say back home? And they're still looking at things through people talking and whatnot. But for those who don't maybe come out directly and say it, they'll use emotional manipulation. And if they're opposed to the marriage or they don't feel comfortable, they're not quite sure of their role, they'll pressure the child and really threaten to disown, threaten to not approve of the marriage, threaten to withdraw, threaten to cut off, you know, all communication. And it really is very challenging to navigate those circumstances. So I have, in the question and answer, some suggestions on how to navigate that. Really quickly, with regards to the other scenario, where you have an immigrant and an American, here I always say, and I give this as part of my marriage talk, I say there's a challenge that you face, but you have an opportunity. You have the challenge is you bring together two different cultures and two different cultural expectations of your role as husband and wife in the marriage. However, it's an opportunity as well. It's an opportunity to, through effective communication, create a new culture. One that doesn't assume anything, but one that that through communication, you can draw from your respective backgrounds, your traditions, your heritage, your family experiences, draw out that, tease out that which is most beautiful from each of those backgrounds and create something for your home and household that's more beautiful than anyone standing on its own. You can create a new culture for your home. And that one that makes everyone feel welcome from both family backgrounds and from the society in which we live. So it's a challenge, but it's an opportunity at the same time, and it really takes communication between the spouses in the case of the immigrant and the American born and raised spouse. So I'll go ahead and stop my comments there, but I have some other ideas I'd love to share with you with regards to how to overcome some of the familial opposition if they come from two different race or ethnic backgrounds. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, thank you for coming today. So how many, obviously everybody in here is a child, but how many in the room do not have children? Okay. Also for people coming in, there are some chairs up front, there are some seats up front. Okay. And the other thing, how many people in here are parents? Okay, so what I'd like to do right now is talk a little bit. I am a child of immigrants, so my parents emigrated to the United States from Bangladesh back in the 1980s. So I was born and raised in Michigan, born in Detroit. So my perspective on this, my parents, when they came to Detroit, we lived there until I was about 2, and then moved out to the suburbs. So it's a very common narrative, right, where you come to the urban environment and then move out to the suburbs and you're raised there. My parents, alhamdulillah, my dad was an engineer, so they put me through college, they helped get me through law school. And my father, actually, this topic is very personal for me. He passed away about a month ago. So I'm gonna try not to get emotional up here, but I think my perspective right now, obviously, my parents, like most of our parents, are very supportive. They really supported me. Obviously, I'm not sitting up here without their support, But at the same time, there's always conflict. There's always discussion about career, about marriage, about religion. These are some of the 3 big topics that we can have conflict about. And we didn't agree on anything. I didn't agree on everything with my father, but we did come to an understanding, before he passed away, on agreeing to disagree on certain things, or at least agreeing to understand where the other person is coming from and maybe why they might have this kind of anger or being upset at the other person. So I kind of wanted to talk about some things that parents should remember and some things that children should remember, especially if you are coming from this kind of immigrant background. So Rabindranath Tagore, he's a Bengali writer, poet, author as well. So he has a quote that I found really kind of valuable. So he said, "Don't limit a child to your own learning, for he was born in another time." So one thing for immigrant parents, the children, we should recognize that sometimes our parents growing up abroad, especially in countries that have dealt with war, they've dealt with great widespread poverty. My parents lived through a war, they have memories of this war. It's a very different environment than what we grew up with here. But then the parents, we should also recognize that when we grow up here, where all of a sudden we've become a minority in this country. There are stories where parents will be like, oh, back home for Eid, we'll be slaughtering cows in the streets and going to everybody's houses. And versus here, you go into a school, in a classroom, especially in the suburbs, you might be the only Muslim or one of a dozen Muslims graduating from your class. People might find your name funny, your appearance funny. There are a lot of different struggles that we encounter here that parents have not, and vice versa. So both sides need to be cognizant of that, because that influences what decisions you make, and that influences things like what career you might choose, who you might be attracted to for marriage, and what you decide for your religious, the religious pressures might be different. There are not the same norms existing. Of course, we also know the hadith from the Prophet ﷺ that says that your heaven lies under the feet of your mother. So we want to keep that in mind. We want to remind all children, especially after losing a parent, you recognize the fact that despite the fights, despite the arguments, they're still your parents. They're the people who typically are the ones who always are there for you. You can always go to them. They're the ones who check in on you constantly. There's that aspect there. So one thing that children, I want to mention this, I'm executive director of Muslim ARC, so we talk about race and racism. One thing that we've noticed for a lot of children is that we tend to view our parents sometimes through an Orientalist framework. And that's something, as growing up, in the United States, in an environment that is saturated with anti-immigrant rhetoric, very, America's, the best, and, kind of this white supremacist framework that we are raised in, we often see brown cultures and brown faces as being less than, right? And we see them as being backwards and uncivilized and worthy of people coming in and changing them and making them better. So these kind of frameworks, we don't avoid those as children growing up here. And I think the most prominent place this comes out is this idea that our Islam, because we grew up in the United States, is somehow more pure or doesn't have any cultural baggage. Now that debate, we can kind of talk about it more, probably not here, but what is the cultural baggage associated with Islam in the West? But there is a culture. American culture is not a default culture. American culture is not a lack of culture. So to say that the Islam here is suddenly purer or much, much better than Islam back home, there's certain cultural baggage obviously there, but there's some cultural baggage here, including but not limited to the white supremacist world we grew up in the United States. So we need to be cognizant of that when we are judging our parents for their choices, or when we're thinking that they are, coming at things from a backwards, viewpoint, that their values are not as important as our values, that there's something inherently backwards about what they're saying. For parents, I'd like to remind them that children, even though they're your own, they're still Allah's servants, right? And that wealth and children are the adornment of the life of this world. That's in, it's verse 1846. So your children are a blessing for you, but they're also a test. So, I know parents, immigrant parents, you feel it's your child. No one is going to love your child more than you. My mom says that. But, you still have to realize that this is an individual that, while you are responsible for them and you want what's best for them, loving them also means respecting their decision-making skills. And there are still some seats up here. So the other thing that I want to mention is that for parents, if you feel that you have raised your child in a good way, that you've gave them a good upbringing, that you've taught them morals, that you've taught them good values, trust that when they get older and then make decisions that you might not agree with. Trust that you raise them to be critical thinkers, that you raise them to make good value judgments, and that they will make a decision that is what's best for them. And if they make a mistake, maybe let them make the mistake and just be there for them, so that way when they do come back, they have that supportive environment. This tendency to go toward wanting to just cut somebody off is very, very damaging, and it can cause really long-lasting resentment and heartache among your children, which can lead to all kinds of other problems. So when it comes to careers, and I think time-wise, Hazel, I think I'm kind of nearing the end here. Career-wise, I wanted to just also bring up the fact that, I mentioned we grew up in an environment where there's a lot of Islamophobia, there is anti-Muslim bigotry. The careers that we need here, it's not as simple as just we need doctors and engineers and lawyers, but we do need careers in the media, in the arts, in mental health, in certain fields that you might feel are not good enough for your child. And you were able to have a middle to upper class job that gave you a lot of economic security, but for your child growing up in this environment, that might not be the best fit for them. And there needs to be discussion on this. And that is going to be my main point, is when it comes to communication, we need more of it and we need better communication. So oftentimes it cannot just be yelling back and forth. Sometimes there is going to be yelling. Sometimes there are going to be fights, but make sure to walk away and then come back. Because that's another tendency that we have is, the parents just say, fine, I disown you, leave. I don't want to see you. And then sometimes the children, they're like, you know what, they never understood me, they never will understand me, peace. I'm gone. And so to kind of take that into account and decide to just halt the conversation and then step back and kind of decide to take a break, that's going to be an important thing. And I also have some other suggestions for communication strategies between mothers, or parents and children. But for now, I'm going to actually pass it over.
Just a little help out for those people standing in the back. If you see an empty chair, if you could just scoot and fill that chair, because some people are standing in the back and we actually have a full house, alhamdulillah. So we have another half an hour, so just to save them the standing for that period of time, it'd be very appreciated, I'm sure, by them. Jazakumullah khair. And if you're in the back, come all the way until you find an empty seat and fill it. So.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه والصلوات وسلامه على نبيه الشريف وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين نسأل الله بالعافية وبالتوفيق بهذا الأمر آمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. So my job is to try to follow up what was said and provide something meaningful. I apologize if my voice, I really feel like my voice is my voice has a love-hate relationship with the microphone. So I'm just gonna be, all this was, alhamdulillah, wonderful. Since I'm the imam that's here, I'm not gonna really play nice with you. So I'm gonna be brutally honest, and my voice is going to accentuate that brutal honesty.
Yes, the microphone is so mashallah.
Yes, yeah, well that's because I have built-in natural amplification, so it's like mic on mic right now. There's Muslims and microphones. All right, well, so here's the thing. I'm not really going to beat you over the head with ayat and ahadith. I'm going to just be honest with you about a couple of things. First off is, I want to ask you, and you should ask yourself this question. What is your goal with your family and your children? If your goal with your family and your children is to preserve and to perpetuate your ethnicity, and you have decided to immigrate to America, you may have just made the biggest mistake of your life. If your goal with your family and your children is to preserve their religion so that they can stand in front of their Creator in good standing and good shape on the Day of Judgment, and you've immigrated to America, I don't want to say you've made the best choice of your life, but you've made a pretty decent one. And I say that because, to be quite honest, I'm not an immigrant. I hate that word convert because, conversion is an event that takes about 8 seconds. And that happened for me a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, right? Over almost 25 years now. So I'm in the same boat actually as some of you, right? My wife and I, even though we're both converts, our daughter, inshallah, actually at the end of this month will be 4. So I have the same daunting challenge to raise a healthy, intelligent, vibrant, successful believer in this environment. So in many ways, I'm in the same boat as the rest of you. The only difference is, and as you know, if anybody here follows me on Twitter or Facebook, I'm that ambiguous black man who's very, very pro-black, right? I'm very proud of my black identity. I'm very connected to black issues. But I'll be honest with you. Once I go into the grave, the only concern, well, at that point, the only concern will be myself. But my only dying concern is I get to meet my child in Jannah. And I don't really care, right? I'm not saying I don't have my preferences. I understand about having ethnic preferences. But at the end of the day, if I can raise my child to be a believer, and she grows up to love Allah and love Allah's Messenger sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam, and arrives on the day of judgment in good standing, then my mission has been accomplished. Whether or not her husband is African American, or Pakistani, or Arab, or Malaysian, or whatever. My wife and I may have some of our own personal preferences, but at the end of the day, my goal is about getting my behind and my family's behind to Jannah. We then, right, we have to have this collective conversation. What is your goal? If your goal is to perpetuate your Desi, Arab, Malaysian, Turkish culture, then I suggest you stamp your passport and go back to where you came from. And I'm not saying that you have to erase your particular ethnic identity. I'm just trying to give the folks here a wake-up call, right? Because you're the folks that are waking me up at 1 o'clock in the morning to come and deal with the problems of your children. And the problems with your children are not due to the fact that, well, they prefer hamburgers over biryani or what, right? You have to ask yourself, what is your goal? Is your goal religious? Or is it some ethnic identity? And you know what? Maybe your ethnic identity, maybe it's that important to you. If it is, I ain't got no words of advice for you, and I don't really have much for you. So you have to ask yourself, why are you here? But in fact, we have a saying in English, which is, you know, you're not in Kansas anymore. Ironically, you actually might be in Kansas, right? So you need to wake up and realize, where are you at? Now let's attach it to something religious. Let's attach it to aqidah. Let's attach it to some kind of theology. If your child grows up in America and develops an attachment or interest into people outside of that ethnic identity, but it will be a means of preserving their Islam, and you have a problem with it, you have a problem with your Creator. You have a theological dilemma that you need to solve. You have a problem with God if you have a problem with people that happen to have attachments that go outside of your plan. Perhaps Allah's plan is that He will preserve your child and the legacy of Islam in your family by it cross-pollinating with something. So you have to ask yourself, are you like those people in the Quran that Allah talks about that they, what? That they will impede people from the path of God. You have to ask yourself, is that what you're about? You know, we have grown up, I think, in our Islam, particularly important for the Muslim world, under this authoritarian Islam, which then, you know, trickles down to the parenting, where we have this authoritarian parenting. And I can tell you right now, right, I actually have a natural authoritarian disposition. A very large man with a very loud voice. So I have a very natural authoritarian disposition. And my 4-year-old daughter ain't feeling that one bit. So my job is not to lord over my child. She already has a lord. She doesn't need a second one. She needs a guide. She needs somebody that will shelter her and protect her and love her and guide her through this life, and that will be there for the ups and downs, and that will laud her for her accomplishments and will support her when she makes her mistakes. But at the end of the day, for me, it is only about Jannah. So you're going to have to ask yourself some really tough questions. Is your goal your qawm, your ethnicity? Or is your goal Jannah? If it's the first, I suggest you go back to where you came from. Ironically though, we're all here for some strange reason. Perhaps it's because vast majorities of the Muslim world are about as uninhabitable as Hiroshima after the bomb dropped, right? It's like radiation. Nobody can live there anymore. Maybe we need to have some spiritual maturity and realize that, wow, it's not about America and how great as America is. I can go on for days and days as a black man and tell you about how now great America is, right? I can go into all of the ugly marks on the behind of America, about how not beautiful it is. At the same time, I'm exceedingly appreciative, right? My child is not washing up on any shore. The body of my children is not washing up on any shore. We better start getting appreciative of this. In the time that I was imam in Southern California, I was there for 9 months. That's as long as I could take it. The time that I was there, mashallah, about 40 some odd conversions, and I don't even live in Los Angeles. I live in a small little suburb. At least 40 people took Shahada. And those people are all coming from some very interesting backgrounds, which only affirms, if you don't love this religion, Allah has no need of you and will replace you with something else. And we see that in the way some of our children are not quite taking the religion from us. We better wake up and have some sense of urgency and get this right, which again comes back to asking that question, do you want Islam? Or do you want what's for dinner? Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah khair to our panelists. I'd like to ask a few questions. Jihad, what are some of the most successful or creative ways that you've seen families bridge tensions within their families?
So, one of the challenges early on in marrying, let's say between an Arab and a Desi, they have different traditions as to who even pays for the wedding, right? So in the Indian culture, it's the woman's family, and in the Arab culture, it's the man's family. So sometimes that could be great if that's the pairing that that everyone wants to pay for the wedding. But if it's the opposite way, then who's going to pay for the wedding, right? So, there's been some interesting negotiations right from the beginning as to, how to negotiate even simple things like how do we put on the wedding? And so there's been a lot of creative solutions in that. I mean, creative conversations that have come out of that. With regards to the actual negotiating of different ethnicities or different cultures, etc. My sister, for example, is married to a Senegalese gentleman. And, the difference is, and he's from Senegal. And, my family, we were born and raised here. And so we're culturally American of mixed background. And, he's Senegalese. Now, Senegalese culture is a beautiful culture. It's very musical. They're very family oriented. So there's a lot of the same values, Muslim. And so in their home, it's the food is mixed. We have American food, they have Senegalese food, they have Arab food, and so one of the benefits, and this is one of the wonderful things about culture. I mean, culture, when it comes down to it, it's about preferences and taste and sensibilities and music having a certain style, and so when you mix some of these, that's when you get the richest and most beautiful things. I once officiated a marriage where the woman was from Mongolia, the guy was from Turkey, and I remember in the wedding, she had 6 different wedding outfits, and it was the most colorful. There was fuchsia. I mean, it was, very traditional Mongolian dress and Turkish dress, etc. So some of the most beautiful collaboration comes about, or cultural expressions come about when some of these sensibilities and ethnic expressions of culture are fused together in a beautiful way that makes everyone feel represented, respected, but something new comes about at the same time.
Imam Marc, as an imam who's worked on both the east and west coasts, what are some good examples of masajid having convert programming or dealing with familial issues?
I'm not aware of any. I'm not. Our community, right, not to make this all negative, and part of what we have to realize is that our community is very young, from a timeline perspective in America, right? I mean, overall, compared to, say, the Jewish or the Catholic community, right, our community is very young. And to be honest, we are facing, I think, some challenges that eclipse really any other faith congregation. And that's actually a good thing, because the Muslim community, despite what we're talking about here, still is exceptionally diverse. And perhaps, maybe even in a time unprecedented in Muslim history, do we have such a vast number of different ethnicities and groups of people coming together underneath the same tent. Even when you compare it to other parts of Muslim history, like in Spain and whatnot. Although what's interesting, and I'll say this, and I've been reading about this a lot, because we love to talk about Andalus. Oh, Muslim Spain, it was so wonderful, it was so great. Well, it might be great from the perspective of architecture, but it may not have actually been so great from the perspective of being Muslim. There was a tremendous convert, non-convert divide in Andalus that actually, in some ways, fed to what led to its downfall and its demise, and it became very decadent, right? If you don't know what the word is, look it up. Our community has become exceedingly decadent, and we continue to invest, right? No offense, I was in the bazaar, right? I see there's like 5 tables. Please donate money to the masjid here. We have enough masajid. I know this will be controversial. We really have enough masajid unless you live in Idaho. And if you live in Idaho, you probably don't want to stay there as a Muslim, right? So we have enough masajid. But what we have is, we're talking about, this is no country for old imams. You cannot stay employed as an imam in this country. Why? It's untenable. We don't invest in human capital. And the problem that we're talking about here is a human problem that will not be solved by building another refrigerator. Because that's essentially what the vast majority of our masajid have become. Cold, empty boxes. They're just trophies so that we can talk to the folks back home about, mashallah, look at what we did in America. We built this wonderful masjid that, 4 people pray Fajr for in every day. So we have to, if you want to have this, I'm not aware of any good infrastructure for this, but it's what we need. 99% of our problems are people problems, and people problems will only be solved by other qualified, dignified people.
Namira? Obviously, these are the very type of issues that Muslim Art is well positioned to help our community address. So what are some programs or resources that you're offering that you recommend people look into?
So we have the same kind of problem, right? Is that Muslim Art is 2 years old, and we are not fully funded even. So when it comes to these kind of resources, I think there's a couple of things I wanted to point out as directions that we can go and some places that we can start. So one thing is that the field of therapy, of discussions, of having a trained counselor to come in and speak to your family. I know many of immigrant backgrounds do not trust mental health professionals, see mental health as there's a stigma surrounding mental health to the point where even, antidepressants or anything are seen as, do not tell the community. Nobody needs to know this, you'll be seen as defective. And of course this applies more to the daughters than it does to the sons, but that's another topic. So one thing that I would like to say is that we do have many Muslims who are going into psychology, who are going into psychiatric care, who are going to therapy, into mental health counseling. Muslims, we need to invest in family counseling services for us, by counselors who understand us. We have a problem where we live, again, in this bigoted environment. So to go have a counselor who's coming and seeing Islam and Muslims as backwards and all this stuff, to have them come in and kind of fix our problems is going to make things worse. So we have very talented, smart individuals who are going to therapy, so we need to support them and make sure to encourage our children to go into that and to support centers so that we have options for professional services. I would like to also mention that one thing that we talk about at Muslim Marc is the fact that the one thing we all have in common is Islam. That is our common language. No matter what your background is, we can put some message through Islamic learning, and then it translates out to where everyone can understand it. So for children and for parents, and for all the people we're talking about, we need to establish that as the ground rule. Is that, let's use Islam, let's connect through that, let's have that be that common language that we can identify to each other through. So since we are thinking about, this idea that, akhira over dunya, so if that is the goal, then we can start to have these resources that kind of address some of these conflicts. So when it comes to Muslim Marc, what we are planning on doing is having some of these suggestions today in a white paper that will come out of the panel. We'll publish that will have some ground rules and some suggestions. I know many of you are involved with communities back home. So take this, go home, start allocating funds, start raising the funds to kind of invest and have some of these resources available for your community and for the problems that you're seeing in your community. We also have a training available online already on compassionate communication. So sometimes it's not even what you're saying, but how you say it. So we want to make sure that we are teaching these skills to people, and that parents and children and husbands and wives are learning how to talk nicely to one another even when you disagree. And to respect each other on a day-to-day basis so that when some big dramatic dilemma comes forward, that there is some way to navigate that without all hell breaking loose, so to speak. So we want to also encourage parents, everyone in the room to take up an activity together, to volunteer, to do something, to kind of increase these bonds, to have some level to connect on so that way you can start to relate to one another in a better way. We talk often about verse 49:13. We created you from one man and one female and into nations and tribes so that you may know one another. With that, we want to make sure that families are realizing they need to do that as well. It's not enough to just say, we talk about this from a racial lens, from an intercultural, wider community lens, but this needs to happen within the family as well. So we want to have a toolkit, we want to have something available for people as well, and that will be up on our website, so it's muslimarc.org. But please use those suggestions to go back to your communities. You are the change agents. So use your resources and collect them, and then work on that as well. We'll try to provide some guidance, though.
Thank you so much to our panelists. I would like to open up the floor now for any particular questions that the audience may have.
Yeah. So, Sharif Afrin, I'd just like to make a comment and get some feedback from you guys. I feel that we're really dealing with the very superficial side of a lot of this. And as an immigrant who came as a child and grown up and now married and have kids and experienced a lot of the baggage of growing up in this kind of environment and worried about what kind of tools my kids have in growing through that kind of environment, I think one thing that you as panelists and all of us have to realize is that we carry a huge burden that we're not quite sure how to handle. And that basically leads us into all of us having a collective identity crisis. And that identity crisis is, what is the Muslim American narrative that we're growing our kids into over here? And the problem is that we're also having them to have the tools to define what that narrative is. I can't tell a kid, you can go and wear a hijab in a place and you're going to be okay. But at the same time, I have to be able to give them the tools to say, no, you should, and if somebody's going to prevent you from doing it, then you have to fight for it. And fight for it in a way that's going to set the stage for everybody else who follows you to be able to do so. That's a burden. It's a burden that we need to carry, but it's a burden that we need to have the tools on how to actually carry out that burden. And part of that is to also, as you all said, what is our goal, where are we going, and as we define that, how do we get there, and how do we give our kids and ourselves the tools in order to be able to do so. That burden is what really holds a lot of us back, and it cowers us back into our social and our little ethnic little conclaves because that's what we know. And until we understand how we can bridge that and go beyond that and teach our kids to have those tools to deal with those burdens, we're going to keep on doing and having these conversations for years and years to come.
Thank you, Shadi, for that, Dr. Shadi, for that comment. Did everyone hear his comment in the back? All right. What he said was, this is an awesome panel and you guys did a great job. So thank you very much for that. No, what he said was, as someone who immigrated as a young man to the United States and was raised here but still has a lot of connection to back home, in his case Egypt, he feels a tremendous responsibility as a parent trying to pass on the faith, not the ethnic or whatever identity, but the religious identity, how to help your child navigate through an American Muslim narrative or American Muslim identity, how to do that. And that's a great question, and that is a legitimate concern. And as Sister Namira was indicating, it's one of the areas that mosques are simply not succeeding in providing that service and that tools and those kids, that toolkit and that environment and helping the community become empowered and the youth to become empowered to reconcile. And so what happens is youth end up with a split personality where they are Arab and Muslim at home, or Pakistani and Muslim at home, or whatever ethnicity and Muslim at home and in the mosque. And at school, they're just someone completely different. And never the two worlds should meet. And it's not healthy to their psychology. This is a major problem affecting our youth. And so you're right. You put your finger right on the heart of the matter. And our mosques need to step up, and we need to bring in imams that can speak the language literally and figuratively of our young people so that they can present an Islam that's relevant and helps them reconcile those two worlds where they can be Muslim wherever they are. They can carry the same values. They can have integrity, meaning that they can have an integrated identity wherever they are. So you've identified the problem, and the solution is we have, as Marc pointed out, now Marc, we have an edifice complex. We build a lot of buildings, but we don't fill it with programming and qualified people that we invest in to lead our community. And so that's where we need to put our investment in bringing on leadership that can be relevant for the youth. So oftentimes as adults, we bring on the imam who reflects our nostalgic memory of what Islam was like back home, wherever that may be. And we feel nice and comfortable. But we're lullabying ourselves into a delusional, oasis of happiness, an island of happiness that gives us those fond memories. However, we get a rude wake-up call when our kids are all of a sudden on drugs, dating, leaving the religion. And that happens when they're old enough to defy you and to get away with it when they're teenagers or in college. And so we definitely need to address that.
So one thing, like I had mentioned, this idea of akhira over dunya. I mean, nobody is saying that growing up in the United States as a Muslim is easy. I understand that there is that burden. I think one thing that we have to constantly remind ourselves of is when it comes to justice in our communities and within our families, it's not easy. And I think we have this tendency to equate struggle with badness, and that struggle is like a negative trait that we need to avoid. Sometimes, though, it is difficult. I mean, things we don't always succeed at, or that it's very hard and there's a lot of give and take, struggle isn't always bad. So this idea about, how do I instill this in my child and send them out to an unsafe environment, at the end of the day, though, like, the worst thing that can happen, how does that relate to your akhirah? So say you are attacked for wearing hijab. What are you going to be asked about, though? We need to make sure that we are raising children who have self-worth, who feel empowered in what they are. And if that means that they're an American Muslim from this background or that background, we need to find ways to make them proud and not just feeling like they're a visitor in this land or that they're always asking for favors from the rest of society. We need to find ways to instill that in us, and one of them is knowing our history. knowing the history of Muslims, knowing what Islam is about, look at the changes in civilization that we bring, and making sure that we are working on making a difference around ourselves so that where Muslims go, good things happen. And we're not just, treading water or trying to fit in and trying to get acceptance. White supremacy will never accept us. At the end of the day, we are never going to be like branded that stamp of approval. You can try as hard as you want. Bobby Jindal can say that he disavows his identity as much as he wants, but they will keep him at a certain cap. He's not going to be president. Like, there's a limit to where we can go in this country, and I think we need to redefine what it means to be a successful American or a successful Muslim. We need to center akhira over dunya. So to just say that we have achieved certain material status is not enough, and that self-empowerment comes from knowing our history as Muslims and being proud of who we are, so that way the choices we make, we can be safe and we can feel comfortable, and that even if I am attacked for this, even if I face persecution for this, who faced persecution? The Prophet ﷺ. He faced persecution, but he still had that self-worth. He knew who he was, and he knew that he was doing good for the people around him.
What was your name? Sharif. Assalamu alaikum. So here's the thing, I've listened to some of this language, and it's important for us to dissect our language. I hear this a lot. We need the tools, we need to give our children the tools. No, we need mechanics, not tools, right? Because the mechanic is who teaches you how to use the tool. Our children just don't need tools. If I give my kid right now a toolbox, it's just gonna be like, I don't know what this is, man. What do I do with this? I'll go and play over here with some blocks, right? Our children need mechanics, which comes back again to that human aspect that is missing in our community. So we need mechanics, not just tools. We need people to teach the kids how to use the tools, and then we have to have the courage to step back and say, you know what? Maybe they're going to use that tool and make something that's going to look a little bit different than I would make, and that's going to be okay. It's kind of like, it's very funny. The one kind of theological track that died out, so to speak, in Islam was the Mu'taziliya, right? The hyper-rationalists. But our idea is like, well, if I just give my kid a toolbox, they're like sort of like high up on the web, right? They'll somehow be able to just figure it out. No, they need human instruction. That's why we have a messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because we cannot figure out how to worship God without direction, without human direction. Now, humanity has shown it can come up with stone idols, wood idols, it'll come up and worship something. But there's one tract that will be successful in that Allah will accept for worship. In the same way, our kids need human direction. The other thing that they need, and we're all dancing around this word, is courage. They need courage. And the way that our children will have courage is if you, the parent, has courage. Grow a beard. Not because I'm going to beat you over the head. I understand, maybe you don't like a beard, but have the courage to go to your job with a beard as a man and tell your boss to deal with it. Have the courage to put on hijab and let society deal with it. You have to have, and when you do that, then you set an example for your child that, you know what, mom and dad are willing to go to the mat, are willing to get a little bit dirty over this thing called Islam. And then your child will grow up in that way. And I very much see the need for my child to have courage. And I think if we're all honest, man, a lot of us are cowards. Our community is ran by and populated by a bunch of cowards. And maybe I have a little bit of cowardice too. I'm not trying to beat up on anybody. This thing ain't easy. That's why it's called dunya. Right? If you want to kick back on a couch with a drink in your hand, well, you're going to get there, inshallah. Right? I mean, the Quran literally talks about sitting on a couch with a drink in your hand. That's part of it. but that ain't happening yet. If you want your children, and listen to this, if you want your children to desire Islam over every other single cultural option, and there's a lot of them, then you better develop, I would use another word, but I'm gonna keep it PG. You better have some courage and live this thing. Because if you come to me and call me at 1 a.m., number one, I'm gonna just look at the phone, I don't know you. I ain't got nothing for you at 1 a.m. I'm not an emergency technician. I'm not a surgeon. If you call me, there's nothing I can do for you at 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't work at the ER. I'm an imam. And I can't fix your problems if you as the parent do not have the courage to live Islam. I don't mean to be yelling at you so much. I love you. I love my community. But y'all got to wake up and really want this thing. Because if you don't, Allah already has those waiting in the wings to replace you. So it's about having, like, this is why, we call, in English we call it theology. What does that mean in the English language? Theos. It means talking about God. Right? In Islam, we have a word called aqidah, which comes from the word uqad. Right? When you tie your shoe, you make a knot. So your shoe doesn't fly off your foot when you're running. Right? So when you're in that turbulence, things that count don't fly off. That's why for us it's called aqidah. It ties us to God in the turbulence. Again, maybe you need to really rethink your passport options. Because if you're going to be here, you got to really want this thing here, man, in America, right? Every time you walk into the grocery store, there's pork, alcohol, lottery, pornography, right? And every time you go in, you make a joke. I don't want the pornography. I don't want the pork. I don't want the alcohol, right? It takes courage to live here. And if you're not up to the task, you need to really rethink your options. That's where the mechanics come back in. That's why the kids relate to people like myself. Why? Because I love this thing, and I plan to die with this thing. And I'm not a jerk. I have a very good relationship with my neighbors. People know me, but I'm unapologetic about this thing. And that's what they need. They need to see courage lived. They need to see it embodied. And when they see me, they're seeing a weak imitation, a weak attempt at being like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like a candle to the sun, but at least it's some kind of light in the dark. Let's remember this is our tradition. Please have courage.
Unfortunately, we have ended our discussion, but I would like to invite everyone to please feel free to tweet them and find them on Facebook. I'm going to give you their Twitter handles.
You can call Marc at 1 in the morning if you have any questions.
We have only one question. We talk only one question, but it's okay.
That's why we would really like to continue with this conversation. For Jihad, it's Jihad_Turk on Twitter. He can also be found on Facebook. For Namira, on Twitter, it's Muslim Ark, A-R-K.
I still want to say that being here in the position speaking is a challenging position. The brother Sharif or Dr. Sharif asked me, challenging you, there's no problem in that. We can ask you and challenge you and change your perspective. And another issue that I really wanted we came here today to address how we as not imams, all those people are parents, they are family members, how we as family members, how we can as parents deal with our kids and raise them and what is the mechanism? Yeah, how I am a mechanic, how can I be a mechanic? So this was my perspective about coming today, that you may answer about how I should be successful American or a Muslim American. As you were saying, we need to know that how, give me how. And this was I was really expecting from our benefit.
Thank you for that feedback, and we would really hope to continue this conversation. So this is why it's very critical to reach out to our panelists. That's why I'm giving you their contact information, so inshallah we'll be able to reach out to them. And for Imam Marc, he's on Twitter, Manrilla, M-A-N-R-I-L-L-A, and also can be found on Facebook. Jazakallah so much. This is a conversation that does not end here. This is something that we still need to continue. And I'm very glad the brother raised up this point, because we are here and we're discussing various issues, and sometimes we listen to things and the point is to go back home with a takeaway. So inshallah, reach out to us, let us know how we can help, and we need to continue this conversation. And because it's a particular community,
we appreciate all the
Jazakallah khair.
Thank you for what
Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair.